This is Matt, and these are the Vintage Vinyl Albums for January 2019. Obsession's debut EP straddles kind of a perfect line between speed metal and the pop metal of the time. Now, am I talking about Exciter meets Dokken? Yeah, in a lot of significant ways I am. It's a fair comparison, notably on the nearly 7-minute track Hatred Unto Death. After appearing on the Metal Massacre 2 compilation, as well as releasing a 9-song demo, the band put out one of the more criminally overlooked releases of 1983, Martial Law. Favorites are the title track, and Only the Strong Will Survive.
You soon find out.
Also, it has great twin guitar assaults. Maybe not to the level of Judas Priest, but definitely capturing some of that heaviness for sure. And get a load of that insert pick. That's metal, right there. It should also be mentioned that they appear on the soundtrack to Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, with the track Method of Madness. A really great soundtrack with such bands as Laz Rocket, Death Angel, Sacred Reich, and others. The movie itself is awful, but the soundtrack, definitely a keeper. Like a number of bands, Obsession took a hiatus in the late 1980s, but then re-emerged in the 2000s. 2006 to be precise, and they're still around, believe it or not, now steered in a more power metal direction. Not bad, actually. Give it a shot. Lion got some notoriety in their time for doing the theme to the 1986 Transformers movie, and while that song isn't on the final album from this Los Angeles-based hard rock band, this record does have one very notable inclusion, which any horror movie fan will know. Well, you'd know the track, but maybe you didn't know who did it. And yes, I'm going to straighten that out for you, right here. In April of 1984, Paramount Pictures released a little movie called Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. You might be familiar with it. And although it's true that Jason Voorhees is the intended film focus, the real draw is Crispin Glover as Jimmy the Hapless Virgin. What we didn't know prior to this is that he had some killer dance moves, amply shown in the movie. But that dance required music, and the song he puts on is Love Is a Lie, which later made its way to this album since it didn't appear on the official soundtrack release. Originally, the record choice for that scene was to be Back in Black from AC/DC, but it's likely that there were licensing issues, so Lion it is. And yes, this is my favorite track on the album. Now, they did other soundtracks as well, such as the Transformers movie, which I already mentioned, as well as The Wraith. It's kind of easy to hear how they're an 80s movie soundtrack band, along the lines of Dokken and Vinnie Vincent Invasion. I'm not sure how Wes Craven missed them, but they would have fit perfectly on the Shocker soundtrack. Now, there are a couple musicians in this band worth noting. Drummer Mark Edwards was in Steeler, along with Ron Keel and Yngwie Malmsteen. Though the bigger name here is Doug Aldrich, who's played with Hurricane, House of Lords, Dio, and Whitesnake. Now, yes, the music is kind of typical for the time and the genre, but it's admittedly pretty catchy and has some great songwriting and some decent production. I'm definitely hearing shades of Whitesnake and 80s Alice Cooper, and admittedly some of the better pop metal acts of the late 80s. Now, admittedly, I bought this record because of the Friday the 13th track. I'm a big horror fan, so there's a tie-in, and I'm a sucker for that, so I bought it. But I might have also did the dance move somewhere in my house when no one was looking. Maybe. But it is a fun record, and you should pick it up. Onslaught's second album continues with the thrash metal assault, but improves upon the foundation laid by their first album, Power from Hell. One of the first things you're probably going to notice when you hear this album is that the production value is considerably better than the first album. It's very much cleaner. You'll hear it right away. The songwriting, too, is noticeably improved. And the musical direction they're taking at this point is a little less Bathory and a bit more Destruction, but with some clear Hell Awaits era Slayer worship in the musical mix, too. Some of the change might have to do with a lineup switch between albums, as Paul Mahoney moved from vocals to bass, and new singer Cy Keeler stepped in. Keeler brings some falsetto, as well as other more traditional metal offerings to the material, which puts it in line with a lot of the indie metal of the mid-1980s. And yes, of course, the lyrics are still of the evil, death, insanity, violence variety, but let's be honest, would we really want anything less? Given that I'm often a sucker for dramatic and overdrawn intros in salute to the Dark Lord, my absolute favorite track is the nearly 8-minute epic known as Flame of the Antichrist. Although some might prefer their comparatively raw sound they had on their first album, I genuinely prefer this more balanced approach. Later releases will have them dabbling in more commercial streams, which might be off-putting to fans of the genre. Some of that material isn't bad for what it is, but it's more melody than heaviness, so definitely buyer beware. And yes, this is yet another band that disappeared after the 1980s, but came back in the 2000s. Though it's fair to say that these Brits have returned to their roots, commingled with their initial hardcore sound and with some recent metal in there as well. The forces when Onslaught really hit the sweet spot in their sound. Other than a couple tracks that kind of plod along, the rest of the album really makes it a true classic. If you're new to the band, you should really start with this album. The second album from Abattoir really followed a respectable debut offering known as Vicious Attack. The album opens with a now cliche intro with wind sounds, something Dave Ingram might call a windtro. Yes, Black Sabbath more or less did it first, and others certainly followed. Unlike other listeners, though, I'm not bugged by it. The sound bridges well between traditional and speed metal. The singer has a rasp similar to both Warrior Soul's Corey Clark and Armored Saint's John Bush, which is really a fair comparison once you hear him. In fact, I could have easily seen this band playing out with Armored Saint or Anthrax. They do complement each other. Likewise, a definite bump up in production from their previous effort. I should also mention that Mike Towers is a replacement singer and was not on the first album. More melody from Towers than the aggression found in Vicious Attack from Steve Gaines. If your love of the first album was reliant on that, this one might take some getting used to. Most of the album is pretty decent, but my favorite track has to be Hammer of the Gods. And aside from a few demos and a live album of questionable source, this is pretty much it for Abattoir. Most of the guys now are in a band called Anger is Art, whose output is sometimes inconsistent but follows the earlier path of speed and thrash, particularly the former. Seek them out if interested. Helloween's first full-length album followed a very promising self-titled EP and did not disappoint. Both speed and power metal are employed on this one, along with some great technical playing, not the least of which in the guitar department. Great riffs, and with some clearly audible bass lines, which are also pretty respectable, and, dare I say, complimentary. You'll also hear some Iron Maiden influence on this one. At times it's really hard to miss, especially on Metal Invaders. Kai Hansen's vocals are pretty decent here, though he'd be replaced by a much more talented vocalist later on. Of course, the band's sound would steer a bit more commercially as well, once Michael Kiske came in. Some folks don't like that direction and often stay with this material. Depending on your own preferences, this might be your favorite Helloween album, or simply one good album among others. Of course, Helloween does have a sense of humor, or at least a sense of parody. I mean, their name even suggests it. For instance, check out the lyrics to Gorgar. I mean, it's a song about a pinball game, for crying out loud. So many good songs on this album, including Phantoms of Death and Heavy Metal is the Law. But my money will always be on Ride the Sky. When I listen to power metal, I tend to lean more towards the European sounding stuff. And Helloween, in addition to actually being from Europe, that is Germany in their case, really sound European. Not just in lyrical content, but music that is clearly influenced by classical masters of the continent's past. Rock is actually secondary here, though. It does indeed rock. No, not that rock. That rock. The Keeper of the Seven Keys albums, yes, parts 1 and 2, tend to be the fan favorites, but they're wrongfully overshadowing their predecessor. Which is sad because this really is a great album and holds its own with the best of Helloween's catalog. It's power metal, but without all the gimmicks. Metallica's third album was the first to be initially released on Elektra Records, technically their debut album on a major label. Previous to its release, fans of the first two albums might have been worrying if the jump to the majors might mean a watering down of this band's signature sound and overall heaviness. But one listen to the record proves otherwise. Although the rawness of Kill 'Em All and, to a lesser extent, Ride the Lightning might be gone in favor of cleaner production and more technical playing, the sheer power and presentation, not to mention an upgrade in the songwriting department, are definitely front and center. There were fans who really got on their case about all this, but I wasn't one of them. Standout tracks include Battery, Damage Incorporated, and the title track, but my favorite is definitely, and eternally, The Thing That Should Not Be. I bought this album the day it came out, and I was really excited to hear basically whatever came after Ride the Lightning. My first Metallica album, by the way, also bought when it came out. I was in a record store outside of Reno, Nevada, specifically because I knew what day the record was coming out. The clerk in the store was just barely opening the first box of copies, and I practically hung over him, telling him to hurry up and price tag the damn records. I got the first copy out of the box, paid for it, and then ran home to hear it. Literally ran home. For that and other reasons, this will always be the Reno album for me. It was an undeniable soundtrack between adolescence and adulthood, and all the crazy girls, parties, and bands I experienced during that 3.5 months before I headed back east. When those opening chords, the Battery hit, I am transported back in time. Every time. A number of band milestones here. This is the last album with bassist Cliff Burton. This is also the last album wholly produced by Flemming Rasmussen, as he partially produced And Justice along with Lars and James, which might explain a couple things there. Again, major label debut album, first gold record for the band, and now 6x platinum. Plus, I hear a whole lot of people really seem to like Master of Puppets, so there's that. I saw Metallica a couple of years after Cliff Burton died. It was on the only Monsters of Rock festival ever to come to the United States, seeing as that was an otherwise European festival, but with some fairly impressive acts. The US version had Metallica playing with Dokken, the Scorpions, and Van Halen. An interesting mixed bill that wasn't without a little head-scratching from fans. When Metallica came to the stage, the entire crowd at Sullivan Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts came rushing down from the stands and straight onto the field, knocking over security guys left and right. Yes, me too. Only a few months later, I saw them again, this time on the official And Justice for All tour, along with Queensryche, who were touring their landmark release, Operation Mindcrime. A perfect double dose of a great band in a live setting. As you could probably figure out, I'm more of an 80s Metallica fan. Yeah, I know, big surprise. Look at my beard. You know I'm old. But I know other people agree with me, and other people don't. There are some newer fans that like the modern stuff they do. But you know what? Either way, there's Master of Puppets, which I'd assume most fans still hold in high regard. Great album, great production, and amazing songwriting. I'm in. Make sure to listen to the Vintage Vinyl Vivisection podcast, as a guest and I focus on a different album every episode. Band facts, production, personal stories, you name it. V3 is one of the 3 public podcasts I produce, all of which can be found at accusationnetwork.com. And now for my classic pick of the month. The Pleasures of the Flesh picture disc from Exodus was released in 1987 with a limited run of 10,000 copies and included the original band artwork on the disc. The artwork itself made it out to the public through early advertising in magazines, but was somehow dropped soon after. However, the artwork was returned to the LP version in a 2014 reissue from Century Media, but this picture disc remains a collector's item given its format and limited run. I've never been able to figure out the exact cause of this artwork's banning, but a few theories might include their major label distro deal with CBS Sony in Japan, or perhaps the art was considered a bit cartoonish, or maybe it was merely a sign of the times and someone at Combat decided to play it safe. Who knows? If wondering about the artist, that's Kent Matthew, who's also done the covers for Slaughter in the Vatican by Exhorder, Forbidden Evil and Twisted into Form by Forbidden, The Eyes of Horror by Possessed, and other releases from Autopsy, Heathen, Forced Entry, and others.
There is a dark corner where secrets hide. Whether forgotten or seldom noticed, these offbeat details of the past remain, to be found by the curious and the receptive. Strange moments in cultural history is the class you never took in high school. Grab a seat up front and turn off your brain as we fill your head with tales of oddballs, villains, outcasts, flops, and other lesser-known events in this thing we call human existence. Find this and other podcasts at accusationnetwork.com.
In more recent releases, Namco Museum Arcade Greatest Hits was released in 2018 by Spacelab 9, who are fairly known for their limited edition releases of video game, TV, and movie soundtracks on vinyl. Much of this record's tracks are samples of gameplay from Pac-Man, Galaga, Mappy, Dig Dug, Xevious, and quite a few others. The packaging is particularly decent with 4 options for front cover display and an 8-page informational booklet. And if wondering, yes, this release is officially licensed by Bandai Namco, so it's likely to be an actual collector's item for the right buyer. Vinyl colors are yellow and clear combo, reminiscent of Pac-Man, 200 copies made, red splatter, 100 copies made, green with red splatter, 200 copies made, and mixed colored splatter on clear vinyl, 2,000 copies made, which is the one I have. A fun record to put on if you miss the frenetic and cacophonous days of 80s arcades. Neon lights and day-glow carpets not included. Before I let you go, I want to dedicate this episode to my pal Les Hernandez of the Quintessentials, who is currently battling cancer. This band has a new album out entitled The Satanic Rites of the Quintessentials, and you can check that out on Amazon, iTunes, CD Baby, and Bandcamp. Or pick up the limited red vinyl release at the website listed below. Also, consider supporting his GoFundMe drive to alleviate the cost of treatment. The URL for that now listed below. And of course, both links will be found in the comments of the post. So some of you might have already heard that I'm taking the show public. That is, it won't just be trapped behind the paywall at Patreon, but everyone will get to see it now, which I really think is the right choice for both the show itself as well as its exposure. So I really feel good about saying to all of you, see you next month.